Well, this is TVLinux, and I'm Shaun Savage, your host. I'm here with Matt Tucker from Jive Software. Hi, Matt. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
And this is the 64th show of TVLinux. We are live tonight, so please call in. And we're going to start with the nerd news. Okay, the first nerd news is Linux is having an identity crisis. Well, you see, there's two sets of thoughts on this. One is that Linux should stay in the geek realm, and the other thought is it should be made for grandma. Well, in my opinion, there isn't a difference, because Linux itself is an operating system. And with this operating system, it doesn't matter what you put on top of it. You can put grandma applications or you can put geek applications on top. It really doesn't matter. So to me, I think this is not really a big issue. But it's hot in the Linux community. So that's an interesting one. The next one, GPL is a license that Linux is written under and distributed under. It's an open source license and basically says you have to share everything. And if you change it, you have to put your changes back. Well, there is this company that created a box that used BusyBox, which is a GPL license, which is a GPL project. Well, they didn't produce the software. After there was a lawsuit filed about it on September 20th, and within just a few days, they basically said, okay, and they released the software. They're going to release the software to the world under GPL and put back the changes that they've made. So that's a real good test of GPL software.
You know, we actually see a lot of, we're a commercial software company, but that does a lot of work with open source. And it's still very interesting to see how much resistance there is to GPL, especially in the large companies. One distinction that comes up a lot is GPL versus LGPL. LGPL being the lesser GPL, where it's less commercial restrictions. Usually you're allowed to use it inside of companies. And it's still kind of amazing to see how much resistance there is even to the LGPL inside of companies, much less the GPL. So it was interesting to see that first test of the GPL license came through.
Right. And with LGPL, you can write your commercial application on top of the LGPL.
Right.
But with GPL, you can't do that.
Or you must make your own source code open source as well.
Right, right. Okay, and this is for all you rich people who have iPhones. There's been a lot of talk about unlocking the iPhone so it can go to different other GSM carriers. Well, what has happened is that Apple is probably going to update the iPhone, and what this will do is it will make your iPhone permanently inoperable. In Geek Talk, that's called bricking an iPhone, because after you've just got an expensive brick. It doesn't do anything except sit there. So that's one of the issues that Apple doesn't like people hacking into the things. But on the contrary side is if Apple does that, they may violate the Magnuson-Moss Act. And what this says, that they cannot void a warranty for a product with third-party enhancements or modifications to the product. So if Apple does brick the iPhone, then they are violating this act, which may, it'll probably go through courts and take about a couple of years to solve. And Apple will say, oops, we're sorry. But you've lost your iPhone in those couple of years.
Right. All right, now the important question is, despite all of this, do you still lust after one?
Yes. And in the past, we've always talked about SCO. Well, at this point in time, SCO has filed for bankruptcy. If you remember, SCO is the company that said Linux was infringing upon its code. Well, so they filed a huge $4 billion lawsuit against IBM. And over the years, they've gotten knocked down and beaten up until finally, within this last month, they declared bankruptcy. So that's fairly good news. That's one pest out of the way. Now if the big pest goes out of the way, we've got it made.
And who would the big pest be, of course?
Oh, it's something up north.
I see.
And this is the next one. There's a study that finds left-wing brains and right-wing brains. Liberals and conservatives think differently. If they find that liberals, the part of the area of the brain that makes decisions, if you're liberal, works 4 times as much as conservatives. So that means conservatives just don't tend to analyze problems that much. They just sort of say, okay, that's it is, and accept it. Well, I guess this is final proof that liberals are smarter than conservatives. Okay. So now we will go to the Mozilla Minute. Okay, the Mozilla Minute that we have today is Firefox. Let me get it up here. Oops, lost it. Anyway, there's a big work at Firefox on working out memory problems. What has happened is that in the past, Firefox has leaked memory, which means when you're doing something, this computer starts to get slower and slower and slower because information is getting lost in the bits are getting lost in the computer and not getting reclaimed. But so Firefox is putting a big effort on solving this problem. So that's a good thing. Well, now, Matt, tell us a little bit about Jive Software.
You know, I don't mean to violate the format of the show. I did bring 2 news stories.
Okay,
we could cover those before we jump into all the Jive stuff.
Sounds good.
I found both of them to be quite interesting, at least. And I apologize, I don't have any URLs. But one of the first one was Yahoo purchasing Zimbra last week for close to $350 million. And as you may or may not know, Zimbra is an open source company. Essentially their product is open source email server, so competing with Microsoft's Exchange product. And 2 sort of interesting parts to the story for me. One was an example of an open source company that had a quite successful exit. I think $350 million represents a pretty good multiple on their revenue.
Right.
But you know, there was maybe a sad story in there as well, which is Zimbra really represented the last credible threat to Microsoft's Exchange. There was, you may remember, another company called Scalix.
Scalix, yeah.
They were sold off to Xandros, much like a fire sale that was earlier this year. And so there really is no credible threat to...
What about Horde or the Novell one that they worked on?
There are a few other smaller projects, but it really feels like there's nobody that is out there that can challenge Microsoft, at least in the enterprise email space for dominance. Maybe Google, if they're able to get people onto the software as a service model. But kind of a good success story for open source, while at the same time
a loss for
the open source movement, perhaps.
Okay.
Story number 2 is all around things happening with Office. So challenges to Microsoft Office. There was IBM that announced Lotus Symphony. That was last week. It's essentially a version of OpenOffice that they've bundled using their Eclipse framework and are now releasing as free software. Also, the Open Document format picks up a little bit of steam with now IBM supporting it through their Lotus Symphony, as well as Google also announcing a lot of support for it recently. And of course, at the same time, ODF is ascending Microsoft's own open format, OpenXML. You may have heard that it failed on the fast track at ISO.
Right. And if you remember last time, I commented on this about how in Sweden, Microsoft paid its representatives to go to the ISO format to stack the deck in favor of the format. So, and this was noticed and reported, and that's one of the reasons why it was defeated, I think.
Yeah, quite an interesting movement. And then finally, Google launched it kind of rounded out its Office suite by launching Google Presentation, I think is what it's called, which is their PowerPoint competitor. So now quite a few different companies and organizations trying to take on Microsoft in the Office software. So while email, maybe there's less of a challenge as of last week, I think there's even more of a challenge on the desktop with Office.
Well, I also heard that within Firefox or within Mozilla, Thunderbird, which is their email client, is going to go through a facelift and really get a lot of development done on it. And that may start to do some, there's Sunbird, which is their calendaring program,
Right.
So I think there is hope within the Mozilla world that may take on Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, I use Firefox every day rather than Internet Explorer. Can't imagine going back. It'd be very nice to have an Outlook replacement as well.
Yes. So let's go back and let's talk about Jive Software.
All right, Jive Software. So we're a collaboration software company. We're here in downtown Portland, around 70 people. We've been around for just about 7 years now. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we have 20 open job positions. So very much hope that somebody sees this television program, decides to go to the website, and look at all of our open positions, including lots of engineering jobs.
Now, you're one of the co-founders, is that right?
I am co-founder and CTO.
So what gave you the idea of Jive Software?
We actually started off as an open source discussion forum application. Bill Lynch and I worked on an open source project throughout college, and also while we were in San Francisco doing the dot bomb thing, where we were at a startup that didn't have a lot of direction. We were actually making more money advertising on our open source website than this .com was. So that was a pretty good sign to us that maybe there was a little bit of commercial opportunity around the project that we were working on so hard. Sun Microsystems actually approached us and said, we're very interested in using this discussion forum technology, but in order to do that, we're going to need much more scalability, a broader feature set. So it was actually an engagement with them through professional services that we rebuilt the product, relaunched a new version of it as commercial software. So I know it's a little bit of a betrayal of the open source movement that the foundation of the company was transitioning from an open source project to a commercial solution. But we've tried to do a lot of open source contributions throughout our history, and I think we're going to talk about some of those today.
Okay, sounds good. So in this collaboration, can you explain a little bit about what the collaboration is for people and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started off as discussion forum application company, and really our leading product.
When you say discussion forum, what does that mean?
You go to a website, post messages, get replies.
Like
very
a
much
forum?
Like a forum.
Okay.
Much like news groups or NNTP, but brought to the web. You can find them on almost any consumer website, a lot of online support. Pick your favorite tech company. You can probably find an online user community that uses discussion forums.
Okay.
So we started off there, and we saw a lot of what our customers were asking us for, what we saw as some opportunities in the market. And so took that discussion forum technology and expanded out to a much broader feature set and launched our product called ClearSpace. That was in February of this year. And so ClearSpace is now definitely the product that we devote most of our resources to. And it's a team or community collaboration product. And what that means is pretty simple. It's either used inside of companies as a way for employees to communicate with one another better. So, for example, instead of sending out an email to the whole company or trying to figure out who to CC or sending a document around and losing track of all the different versions, instead you can use ClearSpace, post it as a discussion, or save your open office document into ClearSpace, track the versions that way, and have a much more reusable, you have a place to find all the content, you have a place to jump in and share knowledge when you need to, a central place to see everything going on inside your company.
So it does revision management also? It
does. So if you put a document inside of ClearSpace, it'll track the versions. You can, instead of putting it in as an Office file or a PDF, etc., you can also do a wiki-style document. So author the content right inside in the product.
Okay.
It also includes blogging, discussions, and then a lot of social features like tags, deep user profiles, all the Glue Web 2.0 technology that's been so successful for consumers, kind of brought over and applied for companies. So that's one market, is that internal collaboration. The other is powering external collaboration. So you're a company and you need to communicate with your customers, or you want to launch a developer website, or maybe you're a media company and you want to have a place for people to talk about latest video game or book or movie. You can use ClearSpace to power that as well. So that's what we'd call community collaboration.
Okay, with community collaboration, you're a closed source. You're open source, but it's a for-profit, correct?
Right. We typically call it developer source.
Source.
The vast majority of the company is commercial software.
Right.
That's what we do. But if you do purchase the product, then we give you access to the source code. And openness has always been a core part of our philosophy. So, in addition to providing access to the source code, we have open APIs, support a lot of open standards. And then one of the other things we'll be talking about today is all of the explicit open source work that we do. We sponsor a very large open source project.
I noticed, I was looking at your website, and the licensing is per user.
Right.
And if you're having a community, how can you do a per user on that concept?
Right. If you're one of these large media companies, you can have a lot of users,
right.
maybe several million.
Yeah.
And so in that case, companies will typically just buy a server license.
Okay.
So it's really meant to, if you're a small organization, you don't have a whole lot of users, you can do bands of user pricing and get the software less expensively. Or if you have a very large site, you'll just buy an unlimited number of users on a per server basis.
Okay.
And we also donate the software to open source projects.
Oh, cool.
Or user groups. So if you're a Linux user group or a Java user group and you want access to the software, we'll definitely give you a free license.
So remember that if you have an open source project, call Jive.
We'll be happy to talk to you.
Okay. So how does this work? How does it really, there's a user interface, but I'm interested in the technical stuff.
Right.
So which do you want to talk about first, the user interface or the technical stuff?
I think they're both interesting topics. Technically, we're all Java on the back end. Both our open source work as well as our ClearSpace and Jive Forums products. So server-side Java, we support a whole bunch of different databases, everything from MySQL to DB2 and Oracle. A lot of different application servers, if you're familiar with that in the Java world. There's open source ones such as Tomcat, and then very large, expensive application servers like WebLogic or WebSphere from IBM.
Right. Do you have a demo?
Yeah, and what I brought as a demo today was on our open source side. So I've talked a lot about what we do with our commercial software projects. For several years now, we've also hosted a very large open source series of projects all around instant messaging. So they're all hosted at igniterealtime.org. And essentially what we've done is taken an open protocol and created a instant messaging server, instant messaging client, and then libraries that developers can use to add real-time messaging and presence to their own applications.
That
We're looking for the URL on the screen, I suppose.
Ignite URL?
igniterealtime.org. So yeah, it is quite so OpenFire is the name of our instant messaging server. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Jabber protocol or XMPP.
I know that, well, I know that it's an ISO standard now.
It is.
And
well, actually, it's an IETF standard.
IETF.
Yes.
It's a standard. I know
Right.
it's a standard. And that it is probably the most versatile standard out there because it uses XML. It is extremely portable across any platform.
Right.
And any server. And I've set up a couple of Jabber servers at my house, but didn't really use it that much.
I'm sorry to hear that. It's so useful. No, yeah, so it grew out of an open source project. I think about 7 or 8 years ago is when the Jabber open source project started. And then it's always been an open protocol. Various commercial companies and other open source entities started using that protocol, and then it did get formalized through the IETF as XMPP. And instant messaging is a pretty interesting landscape. I remember back to email, I don't know, it must have been 15 years ago, and maybe you remember if you were on CompuServe, you could send email to other CompuServe members, and if you were on AOL, you could send email to other AOL members, but it was very on Prodigy, but it was very hard to send emails back and forth between the different networks. It was all proprietary. They had their own protocols, and there wasn't any, there was no notion of email federation where if you had one email server, you could send email to another. And then, of course, the email standards emerged. SMTP, as flawed of a standard as it is, it was an open protocol for doing email. And once SMTP was created and various organizations started using it, kind of became a snowball effect. And finally, those very large islands of email opened up. Suddenly, you could send, from Prodigy to AOL to CompuServe, et cetera, et cetera. Companies started deploying their own email servers. And, the power of email really emerged once everybody was on it and once there was federation. So I think, I bring up that story because I think perhaps the same thing is slowly starting to happen with instant messaging. Most people, are using something like AOL's AIM, MSN, Yahoo, and it's kind of the same story. It's these big proprietary networks. There's starting to be a small amount of, proprietary federation between them. But it's standards like XMPP that really offer the best hope for true open federation.
Is that I have Game, which is a instant messenger, and it supports
actually now called Pigeon.
Pigeon, yes. On my machine, it's a little older version.
All right.
And it supports all these different protocols that all the big guys use.
Right.
And I think it converts it to XMP first.
Yeah, I think the way it's actually implemented, you have that client much more complicated to develop, I'm sure, because instead of speaking one open protocol, they've had to reverse engineer, the AIM protocol, the MSN, the Yahoo protocols, and implement each one of those and maintain that client or that code base. And so you can talk to from one AOL user to another AOL user, but if you want to talk to any of your Yahoo contacts, you'll also need to be logged in through your Yahoo account.
Right.
Now, take that compared to what Google has done. They've actually adopted, when they launched their Google Talk service several years ago, they chose XMPP as their protocol, which means that me, Matt at jivesoftware.com, as my XMPP address, I can talk to anybody on the Google network through federation, and rather than having to do protocol translation, which is quite complicated, you can simply do normal federation just like you would do with email. So we can all hope that other organizations will become as enlightened as Google is in this respect.
If that's the good, it's the protocol standard, and people should start coding to it. It'll take a while, to support the video and the audio and stuff like that. But once that happens, I feel that that's probably the way it will go.
Right, and we're geeks. We love protocols, and there's that element of technical purity. We want it to all be an open protocol because it's an open protocol. But I think just the end user nightmare of having to maintain accounts on every single one of these networks, and you look at a lot of your mom's desktop machine, and or your friends that are less technical, and they'll literally have 5 different instant messaging clients set up on their desktop, sucking up hundreds of megs of memory.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons that the average end user would benefit from the open protocols as well.
Yes, that's one thing that we stress here on TVLinux is open protocols. Follow the standards, and anyone that doesn't follow standards, we come down on.
Excellent.
So.
All right, so our OpenFire server, we were going to talk about that and jump into a demo. So, as I mentioned, it implements the XMPP standard, and it's at its heart a instant messaging server. So we would normally call it an enterprise instant messaging server, or EIM. And why would you use an instant messaging server at your own organization rather than using Google, for example? I guess the parallel I usually draw is, if you're running a company, do you host all of your email at Hotmail? I hope not.
Yes, yes.
Certainly there's the security aspect. So if you're running the privacy aspect, there's a lot of functionality that you can get by running your own server. So you can kind of draw all the same parallels that you would with why would you run your own email server. A lot of the same reasons that you might run your own instant messaging server. And we can dive into some of the features and see why there are some side benefits that you might not anticipate at first.
Okay, it looks like
are we going to pull up the demo again here?
Yeah. It's been running for 5 hours, 10 minutes.
Right. So what I'm looking at here, obviously we're not looking at an instant messaging client at the moment. So I've logged into the administration console of an OpenFire installation on my local Mac. I apologize for not bringing a Linux box in to do the demo on today.
Well, when my daughters went to college, I didn't, supporting Linux would have been hard, so I got the Macs. So
at least I didn't bring a Windows box in, right? All right. Whew. All right, so we're looking at the OpenFire administration console, and it's all web-based. So
now, what software is this running on? Apache?
We actually bundle in a web server, kind of a very miniature web server as part of the OpenFire server.
Okay.
So if you're on a Linux box, you can grab an RPM and just install as an RPM. It'll start up. The admin console will run on a dedicated port. If you're on a Mac, you can download a DMG and start it that way. Okay. Windows comes as an EXE. So you really don't have to install anything else. Once you install OpenFire, everything you need will be there.
Okay. Okay.
In fact, for this particular instance of OpenFire, I've hooked it up to our own internal database. If you want to store all of your data in MySQL or Oracle or an external database, you can certainly do that. If you're a company that happens to use Active Directory or LDAP, you can pull all of your user accounts and do authentication that way.
Okay.
But it's all the standard integrations that you might expect to be there that you would get from any kind of enterprise messaging solution. We have those integrations built in. But if you want to just use it out of the box, that's very easy to do as well. All right, so what we're looking at is the administration console, and we've done a lot of things to make it very easy to use. It's probably, whoops, looks like I need to log back in. One of the reputations of the OpenFire server is that it is a really easy to use server. Maybe why we just won the, I think it's the Linux Journal Open Source Product of the Year Award,
Okay.
Reader's Choice Award. We were pretty proud to win that one. And there's been over 1 million downloads of the server, so we're doing something right. But we have features like translating the administration console into several different languages. You can do things like access the log files directly from inside of the admin console rather than having to go to the file system. And I will dive in and show you a few different features. So managing users and groups. At the moment, we have 2 different users logged in. I created several different users for this demonstration purposes. This is all running on my local box, so we're not going to see a lot of interesting instant messaging traffic. But we have a Bill account that's logged in and a Matt account that's logged in, and very easy to create users and manage them. One interesting feature that I'll show you how this works in a few minutes here. You can create groups in the system, and once you create a group, you can actually choose to share that group in users' rosters or buddy lists.
Okay. So you can have a set of people that are in a group, and the sets can overlap any way they want.
Right, and you not only have that group, but you can say, well, put this group automatically in the user's buddy lists.
Okay.
So maybe this has happened to you, maybe it hasn't, but a very common problem inside of organizations or companies is somebody new joins, and you have the whole rigmarole of sending out the buddy invitations to everybody. All right, what's your IM handle? Let me send you a buddy invite. You add and remove. Somebody leaves the organization, you have to manually remove everybody from the buddy list. This is a way of managing this centrally.
Okay.
So you set up the group, choose to share that group, and then it'll populate it to
and the population
everybody's
is
buddy
the
list.
administrator populates it.
Exactly. So maybe you would do it by departments if it's a larger organization. Functional teams, whatever works well for you.
Oh, cool.
Okay, we can look at the list of sessions that are connected at the moment. So these are all the clients that are connected. You'll see a little lock icon that refers to the fact that by default, all communication with an XMPP server is strongly encrypted. So we use the TLS protocol, also known as SSL. So rather than sending all those instant messaging conversations in plain text over the internet, you can host your own server and have it be securely encrypted.
Do you have also client-side certificates for authorization?
Yeah, you can certainly do that. We also support in the server and our client things like Kerberos. And so if you want to do single sign-on across your organization, Kerberos used a lot in universities by the federal government, places like that. We have support for that.
In fact, Active Directory uses Kerberos.
Right, I think that's true. A little bit of a pain to get it all set up, I think, if you actually want single sign-on to work with Active Directory, but that is very possible. Not a whole lot of people deploying client-side certificates, but that is possible to do as well. Another thing I'll show you, and unfortunately this is a very boring page because we're not connected to the internet, but just to emphasize again that we can connect to other servers with this server. So if we were to log into the jivesoftware.com OpenFire server and we clicked on this page, we'd probably see about 30 different servers that we were actively connected to at once. And that's the whole federation concept. So the jivesoftware.com domain can connect to the google.com domain as well as the jabber.org domain. And as people exchange presence information and send messages back and forth, those connections to other servers will be created and destroyed as necessary.
Okay.
Another thing that's part of the XMPP protocol is rich group chat functionality. So there are a few of us nerds that are still stuck on IRC, and XMPP is a great alternative to that. So there's a very rich set of functionality around group chat. You can do things like moderation, permissions, who's allowed to speak, who's not allowed to speak. So there's a lot of great functionality around group chat that's built into the XMPP standard.
Your thing, or is it within the protocol?
That's actually an interesting question, because there is the core XMPP protocol that's defined by the IETF,
right.
And then there's all the efforts that are part of the XMPP Standards Foundation, or XSF, and that's all at xmpp.org. And what is done at that organization, it's basically a lighter weight standards body. So taking a protocol through the IETF is a pretty thorough process that takes quite a bit of time. Can be very political at times, and it was a big effort for the XMPP or Jabber community to make that happen. But there's a whole set of other extensions to the protocol that maybe eventually we'll take to the IETF.
Into the standard, yeah.
But until then, we need a lighter weight standards process. And so group chat or multi-user chat is what it is actually standardized as by the XSF, is a good example of that. Things like file transfer, rich presence data. There's, I think, over 150 different XMPP extensions that are defined as...
They're the minor standards, right?
Right, that'd be a good way to think about it. So, there's that core XMPP standard, and then basically anybody that implements a Jabber server or a Jabber client will also implement a whole host of other supporting standards. So if you want to have things like buddy icons, or be able to do file transfer, or do group chat, you would refer to the XMPP extension that covered that protocol.
Okay.
And one thing that you mentioned, the fact that XMPP is an XML-based protocol, that's kind of one of its major beauties, is that being XML, it's so easy to extend and develop with. And I think that's why there's such a rich community around developing these extensions to the protocol.
Oh, I can believe that, yeah.
Very, very easy to do. One other thing I'll highlight is the plugins that are part of OpenFire. So we have a pretty rich plugin system as part of the server, and you have the ability to dynamically download and install these plugins, and there's a big community of users that are creating plugins for the system. I don't actually have an internet connection, or maybe I do.
You do.
Okay. So I will in fact show you what installing a plugin looks like. One of the plugins that's very popular is called the IM Gateway plugin. So I'll get this downloading in the background. And the IM Gateway plugin basically provides gateways to the other major instant messaging networks. So it's a reality. Not everybody is using XMPP or Jabber yet.
Right.
Most of your friends or colleagues or partners maybe using AOL or Yahoo or MSN. And so the Gateway plugin will, at the server side, translate XMPP traffic to those proprietary protocols.
On the server.
On the server.
On the fly.
Exactly. And so you don't have to necessarily have a multi-protocol IM client like Pigeon,
right.
Or Trillion. You can use just a client that knows how to speak XMPP, and it will, the gateways will work with that. So looks like that installed. And so if I go back to my list of plugins, we can see that the IM Gateway is installed. I can go back to the server settings, and now we have access to gateways. So I can enable AOL support. We do, in fact, have an IRC, MSN, Yahoo. So a lot of good functionality that are exposed to these plugins.
Test options, permissions.
Right. So let's say you're worried about a certain part of your company. Maybe all the business folks at your company should be able to use AOL because you have a lot of customers that are using that network, but maybe you don't want the engineers or the QA department to use it for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Well, engineers should have access to everything.
Of course they should. I don't know. Maybe there's some evil department inside of your company that's very abusive. Accounting. We'll blame them. And so maybe we need to specifically ban them from being able to have access to a particular network. So we could say.
And this refers back to the groups that you were talking about earlier.
Correct? Exactly. So you just get a lot more control once you bring instant messaging inside of your company rather than using one of these public networks. And you get features like this where you can choose who's allowed to use a particular protocol, but then also a lot more power for the users where they don't have to manually keep track of their buddy list.
How big does this scale?
We have deployments of over 10,000. We've actually tested it to over 100,000 concurrent connections on a single box. And we're about to release OpenFire version 3.4. Actually, I think that the beta is coming out later this week, so that might be something interesting for people to check out. And in that version, we've added support for clustering. Now, I'm sorry to report that clustering is actually a commercial extension to the server. And one of the reasons for that is that the clustering technology that we've used is a commercial product.
You buy it from someone else, correct?
Yeah,
we license it from someone else.
We embed a clustering technology that's quite great, actually, and then make that a part of the clustering extension to OpenFire. And actually, if we look back at the screen, you'll notice this Enterprise tab. And I've installed what's called the OpenFire Enterprise plugin. So you take the base open source product, install the Enterprise plugin, and then you have access to the commercial set of extensions to the server. So I think that brings up a good point. Why is a commercial software company like Jive Software doing open source? And there is one aspect to it, which is we can sell things like OpenFire Enterprise. But that's probably not the main reason. OpenFire Enterprise is a way for us to keep that open source set of developers profitable. But there are a whole bunch of good reasons for companies to do open source and ways that we've seen some benefits.
One of the things is the uniqueness and craziness of open source developers will come up with things that you have not thought of.
Right.
And some of the things that they come up with is just like BitTorrent, all these programs came up out of someone's head and they made a lot, went far with it.
Right, yeah, we're definitely able to leverage the open source community to do more OpenFire product development and debugging and ideas. All of that energy, a lot of that energy comes from the open source community. And so, by doing OpenFire as an open source project, we're most definitely able to take the project a lot further than we would be able to otherwise. There's also recruiting. We've attracted a lot of Jive Software employees through the open source project. Simply goodwill. So a lot of people, the first time they ever hear about Jive Software is when they download one of our open source projects. And the hope is that they'll try the open source, see that we're able to put together a pretty good product, and then look at some of our other products like ClearSpace. And we've started to do a lot of things so that OpenFire and our commercial products work quite well together. One example of that is just the ability to do group chats and presence sharing inside of ClearSpace.
I saw that you do SIP phones, telephony.
Yeah, we do have some voice over IP technology inside of OpenFire. One is just the ability to integrate with the Asterisk project. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
yes.
It's an open source project phone system essentially. And so you can do things like call integration. If you pick up your phone, your instant messaging presence will be set to on the phone. You can also get an alert through your instant messaging client, with caller ID information. We've also, embedded some direct voice over IP support into the client. So you can, do SIP calls between clients, which is an open source or an open standard around voice over IP. As well as some other standards that we support.
Now, you talked about clients. We've been only looking at the server right now. So what does the client look like?
Yeah, let me give you a quick demo. And it's an open protocol. It's XMPP Jabber, and so you can really use. I think there's probably over 100 different clients that support the protocol. So there's a whole bunch of choice. We create a client that's called Spark that has a lot of great features. It's very easy to use, has a nice UI. I'm going to attempt to give you a demo of the instant messaging client where I have 2 users connected on the same machine. So it's going to be a little bit of a confusing demo. We also have the ADM client up, which is an open source client for the Mac.
Okay.
It's really great. All right, so I'm going to start up a new instant messaging conversation with this user Matt. I'm logged in as a user Bill on my Spark client. And I'm getting an alert. And now I'm using ADM. So kind of a silly demo. Yay, we can send instant messages back and forth between clients. But it gives you a quick picture of what instant messaging in Spark looks like.
The reason why we're showing this local is because it takes different ports to do the instant messaging. And right here, the ports are not open. You know, the firewall, it allows for port 80 and probably port 25 and port, FTP and things like that. But this is a non-standard port, so that's one of the reasons why we can't get out.
I'm disappointed that we haven't got any phone calls yet, but maybe somebody could call in if they know the actual port that XMPP uses. So yeah, that's the client. And we also have several open source libraries that let you embed XMPP functionality into your own client software, or maybe you have some server software that you want to embed instant messaging or presence technology into, and you can use our APIs to do that.
And what is that? What are the APIs licensed under?
So good question. All of our APIs are generally licensed under the Apache license, which is a very open, liberal, open source license. Pretty much do whatever you need to do, commercial or open source.
Right.
On the larger project side, so OpenFire is licensed under the GPL, which basically means we want everybody to use it. We want
and you want all changes to come back to it to improve it.
Ideally, we want any open source people to have as much freedom as they need to. And if you're a commercial company that chooses to use OpenFire as part of your technology, we want you to come talk to us and maybe perhaps make a commercial arrangement with us in order to use a server as part of your own commercial product.
Okay. Well, wow. So you're talking any XMPP client will work.
Right, definitely. And there's quite a few out there. And it's funny how often we run into people that are using OpenFire and Spark. With 2.5 million downloads of the software, it's starting to be fairly ubiquitous. And we randomly run into people all the time these days that are using it at their own company, or maybe they've set up a local network for their family, and it's pretty widespread. Very easy to get it up and running, and I think that's why you're seeing it adopted everywhere.
Okay. And as you know, that XMPP, and here's the Standards Foundation.
We have a rather embarrassing website. I think there's some work going on at the moment.
Okay, and remember, we always ask Wikipedia on what it is. And it says it is a open XML inspired protocol for near real-time extensible instant messaging and presence information, aka buddy lists. It is the core protocol of Jabber instant messaging and presence technology. The protocol built extensible to add features such as voice over IP, file transfer, signaling have been added.
I think that's a pretty good summary.
And it is an open protocol, which everyone wants to support.
Yeah, and it's easy to geek out and love the open protocols and the open source aspects, but at the end of the day, it's pretty handy set of features to use at your own company.
Just using it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. So We've got about a few more minutes left. What type of companies are picking up your software?
We have over 1,900 customers, and we have the open source projects used by probably thousands upon thousands, maybe tens of thousands of companies and organizations. For our commercial products, we have over 1,900 customers, and people like Apple and Cisco and IBM and Sun, in that list, as well as large kind of brick and mortar companies.
Have you been trying to get it into the school districts very much?
Certainly, I know there's a lot of users of OpenFire and Spark, in educational institutions. So, at the university level, MIT and Harvard use both ClearSpace or discussion forum or Jive forums, as well as the instant messaging software. And I know there are a lot of school districts that use the instant messaging software.
Because to me, that's where the open source movement I would really like to see get an impact, is because I'm a big advocate of education, and I think more emphasis should be put on education here in America. And so I think that given this collaboration, it creates a very much larger network of people, like there's Facebook out there and all these, fairly what we'll call static collaboration. But with this type of software, with Jabber and the XMPP protocol, you could make more near real-time collaboration within the university.
Uh-oh.
This is Shaun. Oh, hi, Bill. How you doing? Oh, okay. Yeah. We missed you last week. Well, that's okay. Oh, you're on vacation? That's good. Anyway, I want to talk to you about, have you heard of XMPP? Oh, you have, yeah. But you don't like it, right? Oh, okay. Okay, it's open, right? And you don't like open things, okay? Yeah. I think if MSN went to XMPP, you'd have a much, much larger group that can go for it. I really do. Okay, yes, I know monopolies are good. Yes. Okay. Well, I better let you go. I've got to get back to the show. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Bye.
Well, sounded like you almost had him hooked there.
Yeah, that was my friend Bill. He just loves Microsoft.
Funny that.
Yeah. So I was trying to talk to him about instant messaging. He has this MSN type of thing that is proprietary and very hard to get a hold of, and so I think.
And not only that, inside of companies, there's a big push in Microsoft for. They're trying to become the Exchange. They've now dominated the email market with Exchange, trying to do the same thing with instant messaging. So what was called their Live Communication Server, or LCS, I think maybe they've done a little bit of marketing magic and renamed it to Office Communication System recently. But I think there's a big danger of the same thing that's happened with Exchange. We just saw Zimbra. Bow out of the market as one of the last big threats to Exchange. And there's a real danger that will happen with instant messaging market as well. So there's a little bit of the good fight that one can do by supporting open source projects like OpenFire.
That's what is needed. And we've got a couple of interesting things. Let's go to the show times and put the show times up. The show times are, we're live every second and fourth Tuesday and fifth on channel at 7 p.m. at channel 11. So remember, 7/11 on Tuesday. Monday, channel 23 at 10 p.m. Thursday, channel 23 at 11 a.m. And Saturday, channel 11 at 10 a.m. So we're in competition with the cartoons there. So, okay, what we've got is we've got some stories about Microsoft. And the first one is less than 2% of the UK companies have upgraded to Vista. Vista is definitely not going over well. You know, they've spent billions and billions of dollars pushing this and building it, and they say that only about within the next 2 years, only 18% of the companies will go to Vista.
Yeah, I actually volunteered to be one of the first Vista users at Jive Software, and I'm very sad to say that I did. My software crashes all the time, and I actually run a VMware Windows XP instance on my Vista box just so that I can run a set of applications without them crashing constantly. It's pretty sad.
It is. Here's another story. What happened is in 2004, Microsoft pleaded guilty to monopoly practices again, and they basically fined them $2 million a day. So now they owe 497 million euro. And in dollars, that's about $700 to $800 million.
They should take a little bit of that and sponsor Linux TV.
Yeah, yes. And here's another story. It took 5 years and $6 billion to develop, but Microsoft Vista operating system has been shunned by consumers. You know, even Dell, I've reported that Dell. Okay, that's about it. I want to thank the crew. Thank you, crew. There's the crew. So we're at the end of the show. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you, Matt, for being on the show.
Thanks very much, Shaun, for having me.
This was a very interesting show. Now remember, let's put up the Jive software and